and hallelujah. Welcome to our program tonight. We're live here at ABN Studios on this fine Friday evening, July 9th. God bless you for tuning in. We're looking forward to talking about our show tonight, which is Exposing Atheism. I'm Brother Chris here at the ABN Studios, and we're not going to be sharing atheism. We're not going to be participating in atheism. We're not going to be believing in atheism. We're going to be exposing it. So you've come to the right place. We have about 2 hours here to talk about that topic. And in the studio tonight with me is our friend David Wood, who will be joining us on the program tonight. And David, welcome. Always a pleasure to see you. And we're excited to get into our topic. And the topic for tonight's program of Exposing Atheism are the 4 arguments of God's existence. And with us tonight, as well as David and I, is Dr. William Lane Craig, who will be communicating to us via Skype. And that is, if we still have him connected, we'd like to give him an opportunity to speak to us tonight. Dr. William Lane Craig, good evening. How are you tonight, sir?
Fine. Although the connection is poor, I'm hearing an echo of my own voice, and I can hardly hear you.
Okay, you can hardly hear me. I can speak up, or as I'm talking, we'll get through this. We'll try to work this out live here as people are watching, but we'll do it anyway. We're grateful for your time to be here tonight on this program, and as I just mentioned, we'll be talking about the four arguments on God's existence. From what I understand, it'll be the contingency argument, the Cosmological Argument, if I'm saying that properly, the fine-tuning argument, and also the moral argument. Perhaps you could take the opportunity right now to, if you'd like, to talk about, perhaps on a high perspective, what those 4 arguments are, or however you wish to handle it. Would you like to address any of those 4 arguments right now, Dr. Craig? Not sure if you're hearing us. We're not sure if we have a connection at this point. He looks good, but we're just not sure if we're actually connecting with him. So we're looking at that. And while I have the opportunity here, we will take the opportunity to make him some quick announcements. We have tomorrow is July 10th. That happens to be the ABN Ministry 5-year anniversary. That is the Aramaic Broadcasting Network 5-year anniversary. That is tomorrow, July 10th. For those of you who have been a part of this ministry for years, perhaps as long as it's been around, we're excited to see this happen. I suspect many of you are as well, from the progress that's been made, even in the short time that I've been here, the things that have been done. Yes, we still have technical difficulties, but we'll work through those. But it's a wonderful thing to see how God has worked in this ministry, how we have been blessed by Him, how this ministry has, how so many people have watched our programs, have been supportive of us, have been providing the necessary funds, and we just are grateful for how He's blessed us and how He continues to move in the hearts of men and women. This is a wonderful medium here. We're excited to be a part of this, what I call the electronic church. This is a church of the airwaves. We can be in one spot, in one location, in this part of the country, and yet millions of people can be watching our program in this country and all over the world. And it's exciting to have this medium available. And we're grateful that you are here to be a part of it. And we, I think, have a connection with Dr. Craig again. Doctor, can you hear us?
Yes, now it's very clear.
Oh, good, good. Well, that's good. Very clear is better than not clear. So I was mentioning the 4 arguments that are mentioned in your book, which is On Guard, which I'm excited to hear that book is out. I don't really know much about it. I suspect it's a little bit about atheism, but can you talk to us about the 4 arguments? Could you list those and perhaps from a high perspective talk about what those 4 arguments are? We'll give you the floor right now.
Certainly. The first argument is a version of the argument from Contingency, that God is the best answer to the question, why does anything at all exist? The second argument is a version of the Cosmological Argument for God's existence, which says that God is the best explanation for the origin of the universe at some point in the finite past. The third argument is a version of the argument for design based upon the fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe for intelligent life. And the final argument is the moral argument for a supreme good in a personal being that transcends the world.
Well, that's great. We certainly, as people are listening, once we get back from our first break, which will be coming up shortly, we'll give people an opportunity to call in and comment or ask any questions they'd like. So, Doctor, as you may know, we would like you to be on standby for that.
All right.
Let me ask you this: what prompted you, if you can, talk a little bit about the book? Let's say, how long did it take you to write it, and what were some things that perhaps led you to write this book, which is called On Guard?
Well, in one sense, the book took 30 years to write. In another sense, it was easy to do in just a matter of a few weeks once I actually put pen to paper. It's the result of a whole lifetime of research and study and debating these issues on university campuses, both in North America and abroad. And what prompted me to do this book was the need for a kind of training manual for the average Christian layman to be able to give a reason for the hope that is in him.
Mm-hmm. So you say this is more for believers than unbelievers?
For believers. This is a book that is designed to be a training manual for the average Christian who hasn't studied philosophy or theology, but who wants to be able to commend his faith to his unbelieving friends.
Okay, great. Well, that's great. I think the more we're prepared and the more we're equipped, Doctor, I think it's safe to say the more we can share the gospel with others. And talk to me a little bit about arguments. When I think about the word argument, I think of maybe raised voices, maybe even close to people getting in a fight of some kind. Talk to me about how do you mean by when you say argument in this case? What would you say?
It's very important in this context to understand that when I talk about an argument for God's existence, I do not mean a quarrel or a fight. Rather, an argument in the philosophical sense is just a series of statements which lead logically to a conclusion. And if it's a good argument, those statements will be true, and the conclusion will follow logically from those statements. And that's all I mean by an argument. It's not a fight, it's not a quarrel, not a heated discussion. It's just a series of statements that lead logically to a conclusion.
Okay. You may have heard earlier as we were getting the show started this evening, Doctor, that we have with us David Wood, Christian apologist, who is here in our studio tonight, and we know David also has a background in atheism. David, what would you say, as you were confronted with Christ and considering Christianity, what struggle what was the thing that made you come around, or was there one thing that led you to the Lord?
Well, it was a number of things, and I'll say I wish I had met a William Lane Craig when I was growing up. I really wish I had. I found as I was growing up and I would question Christians about why I should be a Christian, they gave me some of the most ridiculous responses I've ever heard for anything in my life. And it wasn't until I finally met a Christian who kind of stood up to me, because I was used to Christians backing down for years. I attack them with an argument. They say, well, you just got to believe. And I say, well, it doesn't make sense to me. How can I just believe in something that doesn't make sense? And so Christians would constantly back down from any sort of questioning or dialogue. And it wasn't until I met a Christian named Randy, who shocked me, because I went up to him actually to persecute him. I walked up to him and told him what a ridiculous fool he was for believing in Christianity. And he actually started arguing with me. And it was, I was so sort of ticked off that this Christian was standing up to me. I decided that I was going to study Christianity. I was going to refute it. And so as I was studying, it was actually two things that posed a major problem for me. One would be the design argument. Dr. Craig has already referred to one version of the design argument. I was more focused on the argument from biological design. So I started thinking, wait a minute, I believe that life formed on its own for no reason. And yet, I wouldn't believe that the building I'm in formed on its own for no reason. And so I started thinking about a kind of inconsistency. Namely, there's a lot of order and complexity in the universe that looks like things were put together for a specific purpose. And normally when we see that, when we see things that look like they're put together for a purpose, we conclude that there's design. So that was one thing that started puzzling me. And the other thing, of course, was the resurrection of Jesus. So I understood, even back then, that Christianity stands or falls with the resurrection. If you want to attack Christianity, you go after the resurrection, and I did. And I found, well, I was actually absolutely shocked. I'd sort of always believed that a couple of guys got together and formed their own religion. Their leader had died. What are we going to do now? Let's start a religion. And if you start getting down to the details, that's absolutely ridiculous. And unfortunately, we have one of the world's leading debater on both the existence of God and the resurrection of Jesus Christ with us. And just because I know some of our viewers may not know who William Lane Craig is, I consider Dr. Craig to be the greatest refuter and debater against atheism, not just of our time, but in all of history. When I was sort of starting off as an apologist, Dr. Craig's works were some of the works I regularly referred to, and he has, I'd say, the best apologetics resources out there. And so just to clarify who's going to be sharing arguments with you, it's I would say, the greatest Christian debater of all time, especially with regards to the area of atheism.
Doctor, on that note, because I happen to see some things today on YouTube. If you type your name, there's some things that can come up, and you've done this a little while. Let's say as a child, was it something that you were, let's say, good at debating as you were growing up, or getting into early adulthood, or is it something you set out to do, or you gradually led into it, or can you give us a little background?
David is very kind, let me say, in his remarks, and I really appreciate that, David. Thank you. For me, I wasn't raised in a Christian home, so this was not something that was early on. But I like to argue with my sister. She and I fought all the time. And when I was in junior high school and she was in high school, she said to me, "All you like to do is argue. You ought to join the debate team." And I said, "Well, what's that?" And she told me about this high school debate team that they have. So the next year after I graduated and became a freshman in high school, I went out for the high school debate team, and I found that I just loved it. And so I debated for 4 years for the Illinois High School Association of debating. And then when I went to college, I debated for 4 more years at Wheaton, representing my school competitively on the debate team. And I never dreamt it would become a ministry someday, but it really has become, I think, the forum for evangelism on the university campus to reach out to students today.
Well, let me ask you that. In the process, as you were naturally becoming a debater, at what point did you find Christ, or at what point did he find you?
It was my junior year in high school. It wasn't until I was an upperclassman that I came to Christ, and what prompted that was I sat behind a girl in my German class who was a radiant Christian, and I had never met anybody like this. She just had a deep joy and peace and meaning to her life that was so absent from mine. I, like David, having heard his testimony, went through a period of just deep despair and blackness about the purposelessness of life and the meaninglessness of it all, given the finality of death. And so when she shared with me about God's love and about the possibility of knowing him personally and finding eternal life, I thought, this is the greatest news ever announced. If this is really the truth, then this is the greatest thing I've ever heard in my life. And after a period of about 6 months of real soul searching, I finally came to the end of my rope and gave my life to Christ. And that was my junior year in high school.
And you never looked back?
No, no, not really. You know, I really thought about it during those 6 months, and I remember one of the sayings of Jesus that deeply struck me. He said, "He who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is not fit for the kingdom of God." And I realized that if I made this step, if I made this commitment, it had to be irrevocable. And now that doesn't mean, of course, that one hasn't struggled and so forth, but it was an irrevocable commitment that I made at that time.
Well, that's interesting. I think we all have our paths of where we got to become a Christian. I never necessarily personally can say I was an atheist, so there was a time in my life, I was raised Catholic, and then there was a time in my life where I really strayed away from God. Eventually, I became aware of, more aware, frankly, of God and the Bible and His Son, Jesus Christ, committed my life to Him. But definitely it was a process, and it took a long time. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. It might be an incident, or it might be a group of people, for example, that might have been a good influence in my life. But I think ultimately it boils down to a decision or a process of thoughts that you ultimately will get into that led you to this. And it's exciting to see how here you are, you've been doing this for many years now, and yet it started essentially, perhaps even before, it seemed like before you became a Christian, and then ultimately naturally developed into what you're doing now.
Yes, the Lord, I think, was preparing me all along for the ministry to which He would eventually call me. And I see that too in the life of the Apostle Paul. God is at work in the lives, I believe, of non-believers, preparing them for the eventual work to which He will call them. And then at the proper time, He calls them, and they come to know Him, and then all those abilities and skills are in place and ready for His service.
Let me ask you about the book a little bit. What would you say have you thought about when someone reads this book, Dr. William Lane Craig? By the way, what an opportunity, and I'm excited to be here talking with you. But as people read the book and they finish it, are there any things in your mind, in your heart, that you would like to see as a result of people reading this book? What would you like them to grasp or learn or to apply in their life? Is there anything you can think about?
Well, I guess I would like to say I would like people to be fearless and bold, having worked through this book, that they wouldn't be afraid any longer to stand up for Christ in a hostile environment. They wouldn't be afraid of ridicule or mockery. They wouldn't be afraid of someone asking them a question. They wouldn't be afraid to stand up and speak out for Christ. I suppose that's what I would really like to see happen in the lives of people who have worked through the book.
Is there an incident, let's say in your debate or in an encounter with somebody, that you felt fear? And what have you, if so, what have you done to address that?
I didn't catch the end of your question.
Sure.
You said if I've encountered anything in a debate
that made you fearful, and how did you address
fearful?
it? Yes, fearful, afraid.
No, oh no,
Good.
Nothing like that.
That's good.
I mean, there have been times when they brought up an objection maybe that put me back on my heels in the sense that I hadn't anticipated it and had to think on my feet. And I try to avoid having to do that as much as possible by preparing well. And what I'll do in a case like that then is go through my notes, look or listen to the recording of the debate, and then prepare a brief on that objection, so that if I ever do encounter it again, I'm ready with my response and won't have to reply extemporaneously. But that would be the extent of it.
You mentioned a key word, prepare. Loaded questions. Are Christians prepared today to bring the gospel to others?
Boy, I'm afraid that in many cases they're not. I think that many people don't know how to lead another person to Christ. They don't know how to share the gospel and bring another person to a point of commitment. And certainly many people wouldn't know how to explain why they believe as they do. But having said that, I think the situation is a lot better today than it used to be. I like to take the long view, and when you look at where the church was, say, in the late 1950s, we are way, way ahead of what it used to be then. As a result of ministries like Campus Crusade for Christ and evangelism explosion, many people today are trained to share their faith effectively. And as a result of the renaissance of Christian apologetics going on in our day, many, many more people now are interested in apologetics and vitally concerned about the defense of the faith. So I'm very optimistic about what I see happening in contemporary Christianity in this country.
That's great. You know, here we are in a 2-hour talk show. We're talking openly about the Lord, about the Bible, about His Word, about truth, and it's very comforting. We're in a room with fellow believers, and many people watching the program are believers, and yet often we're not in that kind of situation, and perhaps on a daily basis, whether in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods, and out in the marketplace, wherever it might be. Would you say by reading this book that we could be more prepared in those places where people don't know the Lord, like in David's case, would confront people that wouldn't defend their faith or stand up for their faith? Would you say, like you talked to this about, that's a long question here, sorry, but this book that you've written, is it, again, more of a manual or an instruction or a guidebook for us, correct?
It's a manual.
Yeah.
It's a manual to train a Christian to be able to give a reason for the hope that it's in him. So it focuses on giving good reasons to think God exists, how to answer the principal arguments for atheism against God's existence, how to give positive evidences for who Jesus of Nazareth was and his resurrection from the dead, and then how to answer the question, how can Christ be the only way of salvation? Don't all religions lead to God? So this is a book that is both positive and negative apologetics. That is to say, it's both offensive and defensive. It gives reason for belief, but it also attempts to answer the principal objections against Christian belief.
Great. David, I'm going to let you chime in here.
Yeah, I had a quick question. I find that there are kind of different types of atheists. There are sort of radical, hyper-skeptical atheists. It doesn't matter what evidence and that you could present to them. If God appeared to them, they'd still say, well, I must be hallucinating. But then you have other people who, they grow up, they don't think there's any kind of evidence for the existence of God. It seems silly to them. Those are the sorts of people where if you just give them a few reasons to believe, they're suddenly open to the message of Christianity. But I'm sure you encounter an objection that I often encounter from many churches, namely, no, you just believe by faith. You just believe by faith. All of this talk of evidence and proving things and giving a case for something, it's just unbiblical. Now, I'll confess, I don't know where they're getting this from the Bible, and yet it's so prevalent nowadays that it's shocking. There was actually a church in Virginia where I used to live that had a sign outside that said, we present the gospel without apology. And if you know them, they were directing that towards apologetics. Don't you dare use apologetics while presenting the gospel, because you're going to interfere with faith. I was wondering, since I'm sure some of our listeners are thinking something along those lines, could you show us that actually giving evidence for what we believe is biblical?
Yeah, the easiest way to show that is to just look at biblical examples themselves. For example, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, where Paul talks about the resurrection of Jesus. He quotes the list of eyewitnesses to the resurrection of Jesus. Now that goes beyond anything that he needed to show in that chapter concerning the resurrection body. But what he's doing there is piling up the witnesses to the fact of Jesus' resurrection to secure its historicity. He is giving what he takes to be a convincing historical proof by the standards of that time. And even the radical New Testament scholar Rudolf Bultmann, who didn't believe in the resurrection of Jesus, was quite candid in rebuking the fideistic theologian Karl Barth about 1 Corinthians 15. Bultmann said, clearly what Paul is trying to do here is to give historical evidence for the fact of the resurrection. And Bultmann thought that that was a disaster. He thought you shouldn't do that, but nevertheless, he clearly recognized that was Paul's intention. In fact, whole books of the Bible are exercises in apologetics. The whole Gospel of Luke just is an apologetic for the person of Christ based upon eyewitness testimony that Luke followed as a historian. So you find in the apostles, you find in the Gospels, examples of apologetics. I think you find them in Jesus himself. Jesus said, if you do not believe me on the basis of my own words, then believe me for the sake of the works that I do. He thought that the miracles that he performed and the prophecies he fulfilled were evidence of the truth of his claim to be the long-awaited Messiah. And the apostles followed Christ's example in appealing to his miracles, to his resurrection, to fulfilled prophecy, to show fellow Jews that Jesus was in fact the Messiah. And when they dealt with Gentile audiences, then what you have is what you see in Romans chapter 1 and Acts chapter 17, where they appeal to the evidence of nature around you to show that there is a creator of the universe to whom all men are responsible. And then they would appeal to Jesus' resurrection as evidence that this creator has especially revealed himself in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. So the New Testament is just replete with examples of Christian apologetics, of defense of the faith. The apostles did not think that in presenting evidence for the truth of Christianity, they were doing something contrary to or apart from the Holy Spirit. They were trusting the Holy Spirit to use the evidence and the arguments as they presented them to draw people to Christ.
So, Dr. Craig, we're constantly told from from people like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and others that faith is something you believe in that's contrary to the evidence, or something you believe in when there's absolutely no evidence. And I was wondering if you could give what you think is a biblical definition of faith, because if the apostles are giving evidence for what they believe, then obviously there can't be a conflict between faith and evidence. So could you give us kind of a biblical definition of what biblical faith would be?
Yes, it is a complete misunderstanding to think of faith as a way of knowing something, as Dawkins and some Christians think. They think that the way you know these things is by faith. That's not the biblical conception of faith. The biblical conception of faith is a way of trusting in something, a way of committing your life and your soul to something. And that is something that you can know to be true. So it's not a way of knowing, it's a way of trusting in something. So faith is the whole old trust in God that comes as a commitment to him because you believe it's the truth.
Doctor, we're going to go to a break in just a couple minutes here, unless, David, you needed to make a comment or question.
No, that's fine.
We're going to go into the four things we mentioned: the contingency argument, the cosmological argument. That was
okay. Incorrect. Yeah.
Okay. The fine-tuning argument and the moral argument. Could you, before we go to break, talk to us a little more in detail about the contingency argument?
Yes, the contingency argument basically goes like this. Everything that exists has an explanation for its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or else in an external cause. Now, if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation will be God. Thirdly, the universe obviously exists. Now, from that, it follows that therefore the universe has an explanation of its existence, and from that it follows that therefore the explanation of the universe is God. So this is a logically valid argument for the existence of God. If the three premises are true, then it follows necessarily that God exists. So the only question will be, are the premises true?
Okay. Well, good. On that note, we are getting closer to our break here. We're going to give people a chance right after we get back from break to call in, those who are on our line. We've got perhaps some callers waiting to get in, so we're going to do that in just a minute. So stay tuned. call us back. You can start calling at 248-416-1300. That's the phone line here, 248-416-1300 for the Exposing Atheism show. And we welcome your calls. Please do that. We'll be right back after this brief break. Okay, welcome back. Thanks for staying with us tonight on this show, Exposing Atheism. Before we get back into our discussion with Dr. William Lane Craig and David Wood, I want to mention a couple of quick announcements. Speaking of David, David will also be on later this evening on our show, Jesus or Muhammad, with Pastor Joseph and Sam Shamoon. That'll be on at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so make sure after this program is over, take a little break and then come on back and tune in later tonight, as well as tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. on Saturday, which again is our 5-year anniversary at ABN. So a lot of things going on here tonight and this weekend at the ministry. So I'm going to get out of the way, and if I could just, David, could you go ahead and jump in, and we'll pick up with where we left off with Dr. Lane Craig.
Yes, Dr. Craig said that the argument, the contingency argument that he just briefly reviewed, since the argument is valid, it depends on whether the premises are true, or whether the statements that you're starting with in order to arrive at your conclusion, whether those are true. So if you don't have a background in argumentation, when you have an argument, you're looking for two things. You're looking for logic. In other words, the conclusion really does follow from the statements you're starting with. And second, you're looking for true premises or true statements. So you could offer all kinds of bad arguments if you start with false premises. So if I start with the claim that George Bush is the current president of the United States, and I build an argument off that, I'm going to probably arrive at a false conclusion because what I'm starting with is not true. So Dr. Craig pointed out that the logic of the argument is valid. In other words, if what he's starting with is true, then the conclusion that God exists follows. So Dr. Craig, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Yes, could you explain to us a little bit about why you believe that the statements you're starting with, your premises, are true, and therefore that the conclusion follows?
All right. Well, you remember there were 3 premises, and the third one of these was that the universe exists. And I think that's obviously true for any sincere seeker after truth. He's not going to deny that there's a universe out there. So the question really comes down to the first 2 premises. Are these more plausibly true than false? Well, let's just think about them. The first one says that everything that exists has an explanation of its existence. That is to say, there's an explanation why the thing exists. And this can be found either in the necessity of its own nature or else in an external cause. And I think when you reflect on this principle, it has a sort of self-evidence about it. An example that the philosopher Richard Taylor gave that I find very compelling is the illustration of someone walking through the woods and finding a translucent ball on the forest floor. He would naturally wonder why that ball came to be there. He would say there had to be some explanation of the existence of this thing. And merely increasing the size of the ball, say to the size of a car, or the size of a house, or the size of a continent, wouldn't do anything to either remove the need for or provide an explanation of the existence of that thing. Increasing the size of it doesn't do anything to get rid of the need for an explanation or to provide an explanation. Indeed, if you increase the size of the ball until it becomes the size of the whole universe, you're still faced with the question, why? Why does it exist? And that explanation can be found in either 2 factors. Either the thing exists by a necessity of its own nature. That is to say, it's impossible for it not to exist. Examples of things that exist by a necessity of their own nature might be things like numbers or sets or other mathematical objects. Many philosophers think that if these things exist, they exist by a necessity of their own nature. They don't have causes that bring them into being, they just exist necessarily. The other type of explanation would be a causal explanation. Examples would be things like people, trees, chairs, automobiles, planets, galaxies. the explanation for these things lies in an external cause for why they exist. And so it seems to me, when I reflect on it, that that first premise has a sort of self-evidence about it, that everything that exists has an explanation why it exists, either in the necessity of its own nature or else in some external cause.
Okay. Those who are watching tonight, I mean, as I think, Doctor, of reasons why people don't believe in God, I've heard the argument, how can you look around and look at creation and look at the sky and the trees and the grass and the beauty of the water and the sunset? How can one say, and the detail in little plants and seeds and the way they happen every year, that might be one argument. How can you say that there's no creator when there's this beautiful creation that we have?
That's a very argument.
Yes, very common
That's
argument.
Based upon design or the beauty of creation. But here, we're asking the ultimate question. What Leibniz said, the great philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, said is the first question which should rightly be asked, and that just is the question of existence. Why does anything at all exist? This is the most basic and profound question of philosophy. Why is there something rather than nothing? Now, notice that first premise doesn't say anything about God. It doesn't get you to God. It just says that everything that exists has an explanation for why it exists, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. It's the second premise that gets you to God, and that premise says, if the universe does have an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. And this is a premise with which most atheists agree. Most atheists say that if there is no God, then the universe has no explanation of its existence. It's just a brute fact. It just exists, and there isn't any explanation. So most atheists will tell you that if atheism is true, if God does not exist, there is no explanation for the universe. Well, that's logically equivalent, you see, to saying that if God does exist, then atheism is not true. That is to say, if God does exist, then God is the explanation for the existence of the universe. So the second premise of the argument is one with which the vast majority of atheists agree. They agree with that second premise. Well, at that point, the argument is over, because then if the universe exists, it follows the universe has an explanation of its existence, and if the universe has an explanation of its existence, then God is the explanation of the universe, and therefore God exists. So I think you can see from this disarmingly simple argument, it follows that God exists. And moreover, God here is not some sort of ambiguous, ill-defined flying spaghetti monster. We're talking here about a metaphysically necessary, transcendent being beyond space and time who has brought into existence everything else that exists. So this is, I think, a very powerful argument for God's existence.
David.
Yes, Dr. Craig. Let me go and raise an objection here. So you've pointed out that everything that exists has an explanation for its existence, either in itself or in something outside of it. I agree that that seems self-evident. For those, if anyone out there kind of misses the point, it's take me, for example. I either exist on my own or something else explains why I'm here. So my parents or God creating me, something other than myself accounts for my existence. And most of the things we look around and see, something else explains those things. So this desk I'm sitting at, someone made this, someone put it together. Its existence is explained by something else. So there are only two kinds of things that exist on their own necessarily, or things that exist because something else made them. So let me go ahead and bring up an objection here. Why couldn't we say that things are explained by things that happened before them, and you just kind of go on forever? So this desk is explained by a tree being there and someone else putting the tree together in a certain way to make a desk, and that person is explained by something that happened before him, and the wood is explained by other trees producing things, and you can sort of go back and back and back just forever. You could always go to a prior explanation of why things are. So do we ever actually need to have an explanation, a necessary, something that's self-existent, something that accounts for its own existence?
It's very important to understand that the argument from contingency doesn't assume that the causal series can't go back and back to eternity. It's quite compatible with the idea that everything has a cause and it just keeps going back and back ad infinitum. What Leibniz is asking is a more fundamental question. Why is there anything rather than nothing? Why is there an eternally existing universe rather than nothing? So Leibniz isn't talking about a sort of causal series in time. He's stepping back and looking at the whole big picture and saying, why does the universe exist? And that's consistent with the universe being eternal in the past or having a beginning. That's just not germane to the argument. The question of whether the universe has a beginning is vital to the second argument that we're going to talk about, the Kalam cosmological argument. But this contingency argument is quite compatible with the universe being eternal. And what we want to ask here is, why does this eternal universe exist? Is it necessary? Does it exist by a necessity of its own nature? Or does it have an external cause?
Dr. Craig, let me go ahead and give you the other objection that would be raised here. Namely, if you're going to say that God explains himself, God is the explanation for his own existence, why couldn't you just say that about the universe? Instead of taking that extra step back to God, why not just say the universe explains its own existence?
Now, it's important to understand that that would involve a radical retrenchment on the atheist's part. As I said, the overwhelming majority of atheists believe that if atheism is true, the universe has no explanation of its existence, which means that if the universe does have an explanation of its existence, then God exists, that atheism is not true. So I really can't think of any contemporary atheist who thinks that the universe exists by a necessity of its own nature. Rather, they believe to a man that the universe is just a brute, unexplained, inexplicable contingent. But for the sake of argument, let's consider an atheist who says, well, the universe exists by a necessity of its own nature. I think there's some good reasons to think that the universe does not exist by a necessity of its own nature. As we look out at the universe, it doesn't seem like any of the things that exist in the universe exist necessarily. If matter and energy had been differently configured, none of those things would have existed. In fact, at some point in the past, none of those things did exist. So it doesn't appear that the things in the universe exist necessarily. Now, someone might say, well, all right, but what about the matter and energy themselves? The matter and energy can be in different shapes and forms, but the matter and energy exist necessarily. Well, the problem with that, I think, is that according to contemporary physics, the basic building blocks of the matter and energy in the universe are these tiny fundamental particles like quarks or electrons, or they're little tiny strings of energy. And what the atheist would have to say is that every single one of these quarks exists by a necessity of its own nature, which is just fantastic. Surely a different collection of quarks could have existed than the collection of quarks that actually exist. And if that's true, then you would have a different universe. It would show that this is not a universe that exists by a necessity of its own nature. I don't know anybody who thinks that every quark in the universe exists by a necessity of its own nature. That just seems to be outlandish. So I think that we have very good reason to think the universe doesn't exist necessarily. I would also add that we do have very good grounds for thinking that the universe is not eternal in the past, but did have a beginning. And if the universe came into being, then that proves that it's not necessary, because anything that exists necessarily has to exist eternally. It can't come into being. So if the universe did come into being, that would show that it exists contingently and not necessarily. So the cosmological argument can supplement the argument from contingency by showing that the universe doesn't exist by a necessity of its own nature.
Well, why don't you go through the Kalam argument with us?
Okay, that's the next argument that I share, and it is very simple. It basically goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Things don't just come into being without a cause. Things that begin to exist have a cause that brings them into being. But the universe began to exist. We have good philosophical reasons as well as good scientific evidence that the universe began to exist. And from that, it follows, therefore, the universe has a cause. And what you then do is analyze what it means to be a cause of the universe, a cause of space and time, matter and energy. And many of the traditional attributes of God can be recovered from this sort of philosophical analysis, so that ultimately you conclude that there exists an uncaused, beginningless, timeless, spaceless, immaterial, personal creator of the universe of unfathomable power, which is a core conception of what theists mean by God.
Now, this the first premise there, I think, is extremely important, because when you hear sort of street apologetics, and I've even seen sort of lay-level Christian apologetics works that will start off by saying everything has a cause of its existence, and then they'll go forward to give some version of the cosmological argument for God's existence. But that's not what you're arguing here. You're not saying everything has a cause of its existence, because the obvious objection
say,
there,
in all honesty, I don't hear Christians making this mistake. What I hear is atheists setting up this straw man argument in the mouths of Christians and then saying, aha, then what's God's cause? But I think this is just a caricature that atheists have propounded of the cosmological argument. But I don't hear intelligent Christian apologists saying everything has a cause. I don't know of any theist in the history of thought that has said that everything has a cause.
Oh, I agree, but I have seen it at kind of a lay level.
Exist has a cause.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and so you would take that first premise as self-evident?
Well, I think it's self-evident, yes. I think that when you contemplate the idea of coming into being, that the idea that being could come from non-being is just metaphysically absurd. And this idea that being only comes from being is as old as Plato and the early Greek philosophers. This is a fundamental principle of classical metaphysics, that out of nothing, nothing comes. And that therefore, if something comes into being, there must be another being of some sort that has caused it and brought it into existence. But I think you could also give arguments for this. For example, anything that comes into being is the actualization of its potentiality to be. Things have the potentiality of existing, but in order for them to come into being, that potential has to be actualized. But no potentiality can actualize itself. Only an actuality can actualize the potentiality of something else to be. And therefore, again, it would follow that anything that comes to be must have a cause, because you need an actual being in order to actualize its potentiality for existence. And what's interesting in the case of the universe is that prior to the existence of the universe, there wasn't even the potentiality of its existence. There was just nothing on atheism. So it seems utterly impossible on atheism that the universe could come into being. It seems to me you have to have an actual being with the potential to create the universe, which would be theism. And finally, I do think we have the best of empirical evidence for the truth of that first premise. It's universally confirmed in our experience. It's never falsified. So purely on a scientific basis, we have the best of evidence for thinking that everything that begins to exist has a cause.
So if we take one as true for various reasons, how would you say we can prove two, that the universe began to exist?
Well, there's a long tradition in Judeo-Christian Islamic thought of arguing on philosophical grounds for the beginning of the universe. And I'm persuaded that these are good arguments. One of these arguments would be based on the impossibility of the existence of an actually infinite number of things. You can show that if an actually infinite number of things could really exist, it leads to all sorts of counterintuitive absurdities. And therefore, I think it makes it very plausible that you cannot have an actually infinite number of things actually exist. But that means that the series of past events must be finite, because otherwise you would have an actually infinite number of past events. So that would be one argument for the finitude of the past. Another argument that would be quite independent would be that you cannot form a collection that is actually infinite by adding one member after another. The only way that an actually infinite number of things could exist would be if they all came into existence simultaneously. But the series of past events has come into being by one event being added after another. The events of the past have come into being sequentially. The series of past events has occurred one event after another until you get to today. But if you cannot form an actually infinite number of things by adding one member after another, it follows that the series of past events cannot be infinite. There must have been a beginning to the series of past events, and therefore a beginning to the universe itself. So those would be two arguments that I think are good arguments for the finitude of the past and the beginning of the universe.
So let me when you were defending your first premise, let me raise an objection here. You said prior to the existence of the universe. If we're talking about prior to the existence of the universe, I'm assuming you would agree that time is a property of our universe. Therefore, what sense could we make of saying before the universe existed? Because this is time language, this is temporal language. So how can we talk about before there was any time?
You have to quote my entire sentence. I said, prior to the existence of the universe, there was no potentiality for its existence. And that's a coherent statement. That is to say, there is no potentiality for the existence of the universe prior to the existence of the universe, because there is no prior to the existence of the universe. It's to say that there wasn't anything prior to the existence of the universe. That time begins at the Big Bang, or begins at the moment of creation, and therefore there just is nothing prior to the existence of the universe. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Oh, of course I do. I'm trying to clarify stuff.
Well, then I'm going to ask it, maybe a dumb question, but so before the universe, now that we're on that topic, so, and I'm thinking like a man, I think, how long was it, how much time took place, since God always, well, that doesn't make sense either. God always existed, so how can I even ask this question? How long was God around before he created the universe? Makes no sense.
If time began at the beginning of the universe, that's a meaningless question.
Right.
There was no time prior to the beginning of the universe, because there is no prior to the beginning of the universe. Time begins at the moment of creation. So what we would want to say is that God existing alone without the universe is timeless.
Right. Very good.
He always exists, not in the temporal sense, but in the sense that he never began to exist. He simply transcends time.
Well, speaking of time, we have some time. We have no callers at this point, so if anyone would like to, this is a golden opportunity to speak with a leading, if not the leading authority on exposing atheism. He's here tonight, ready to handle your calls. Some of you may be out there like me, maybe slightly overwhelmed by the information, but it's certainly a great opportunity to come in, to call in, and ask a question of the expert here, and of course with David Wood as well, a former atheist. I'm surrounded by two theists, and I myself am a theist, not an atheist. And so if any other theist out there, or any atheist out there, would like to call, please do. Take the opportunity at 248-416-1300. We'll be going to a break in a few minutes or so. You know, one of the oppositions I hear, frankly, when it comes down to it, wouldn't you say, Doctor, that somebody who doesn't accept or doesn't admit anyway that there's a God, that there's a God that created the universe, I've always felt that as soon as you do that, you automatically say, well, then if I don't accept him, kind of pretend he's not there, or say that I don't believe he's there, well, then I'm safe. But when I start to say, okay, there's a God who created me, then at that point I immediately have to say, well, then I must probably, since he created me, have to obey him, have to submit to him. Would you say submission to God is, or not wanting to submit to God, is perhaps another reason why people don't admit there is a God?
Well, you're asking me here about the psychological motives behind atheism. And as a philosopher, I simply will not address that sort of question. I am interested in assessing the soundness of arguments for or against the existence of God. But I'm not in the business of making personal judgments about the psychology of atheists, about what motivates them to disbelieve or what motivates people to believe. We need to get away, I think, from making these sorts of personal assessments or personal attacks, and just stick to the arguments and the evidence and not speculate about people's personal motivations for what they think why they think as they do.
Dr. Craig, speaking of arguments and evidence, you defended the claim that everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence, and you defended the claim that the universe began to exist. But how do you get from the claim that the universe has some cause of its existence to God exists? Because the concept of God is very specific. We have God has various attributes. How do you get to the attributes of the cause rather than just some random cause?
Excellent question. What we need to do then is a conceptual analysis of what it means to be a cause of the universe. And we've already started to do that in our discussion tonight when we began to ask about the relationship of this cause to time. And what we concluded together was that if there is a cause of the universe, of space-time itself, that cause cannot itself be in time. It must transcend time and therefore be timeless. Moreover, I would argue, it must similarly transcend space, since it created space in creating the universe. So we've already got to a cause which transcends space and time and therefore exists atemporally and aspatially. Now that is a conclusion of enormous significance, because what that implies is that this cause cannot be any sort of material or physical object, because physical objects exist in time and space. This must therefore be an immaterial, non-physical reality, which transcends space and time and which brought the universe into being. Moreover, we know from the argument that there cannot be an infinite regress of causes, so this must be an uncaused being, which is beginningless in its existence. Since it brought the universe into existence without any kind of material cause, material substrate, it must be enormously powerful, if not omnipotent. So we're already to a cause which is beginningless, uncaused, timeless, spaceless, immaterial, and enormously powerful. Now, I want to add the coup de grace, which is that I think it has to be personal as well. Why is that? Well, what kind of entity can exist timelessly, spacelessly, and be immaterial? There are only two kinds of things that philosophers can think of that would fit that bill. One would be an abstract object, that is to say something like a number or a set. These exist timelessly and spacelessly and are immaterial. The other would be an unembodied mind, that is to say a pure consciousness without a body. Now, given those two alternatives, it follows that the origin of the universe must be due to an unembodied mind. Why is that? Well, simply because abstract objects like numbers don't stand in causal relationships. That's part of the definition of what it means to be an abstract object, is that it is causally impotent. The number 7, for example, has no effects whatsoever. And yet we know this cause has brought the universe into being. And therefore it follows that this cause is a personal consciousness, personal mind without a body, which has brought the universe into being. And therefore we get to a concept which I think is very significant theologically, because this cause has some of the central properties of the classical conception of God.
Well, Doctor, we go into break in just a few seconds, I think, here. We will be going into the next two arguments, fine-tuning and more arguments that will be coming up after the break. So again, just a reminder for you that are out there, please consider calling us at 248-416-1300, and we'll get you right on the air as soon as we can. The lines are open, so keep that in mind, and we'll take a quick break, and we'll be back, and we'll be waiting for your calls on Exposing Atheism tonight at ABN. Thank you. Well, welcome back to ABN Ministries here. I'm Brother Chris. It's Friday night, July 9th, and you're watching live Exposing Atheism with Brother David Wood, and also our guest via Skype, Dr. William Lane Craig. We're halfway through the 4 arguments of God's existence, and we are grateful for God's existence, and we're going to be going into that. Before we get too much further, I did want to take the opportunity, a couple of quick announcements, as we do here often on our programming. Again, thanks for tuning in. Be aware that next month, August 12th, there'll be a live debate. Reverend Tony Costa and Osama Abdallah, who is a man that represents with Islam. That'll be coming up on August 12th at 8 p.m., and we're looking forward to that. So it's about a month away or so, and we'll have weekly debates coming up in August. So the debate continues, the arguments continue. So why don't we, again, make note of the phone number on the TV there, 248-416-1300. We're going to transition into the next argument, which is fine-tuning. David, talk to us.
Yes, so it seems based on Dr. Craig's first 2 arguments, we can conclude that that the universe has an explanation for its existence, and that we must go back to some sort of necessary being as the cause of the universe, as the explanation of the universe. And his second argument would show that the universe has a cause, and that the cause has to transcend space and time and has to be personal. But it seems we're missing a couple things from God's nature, and it looks like the next 2 arguments can help us fill in some of these gaps. And the next argument that Dr. Craig has listed, the argument from fine-tuning, this is interesting to me because I sort of learned this lesson. Never left me when I was a little kid. I was maybe 7 years old, and my friend had a fish tank. He was about the same age as I was. He had a fish tank, and there was a thermometer in the fish tank to make sure that the temperature stayed just right. And we kind of used that thermometer to try and attack the fish. So we were launching this thermometer into the fish tank to try and hit the fish. And eventually we cracked the thermometer, so it was no good anymore. And so he tried to keep the temperature about right, and within a few days all the fish had died. So what I learned then was you sort of have to keep the environment just right. You have to keep that fish tank just right, or or the fish aren't going to make it. They cannot exist. And there's a sort of a similar idea to the argument from fine-tuning, namely that our universe has to be just right, or we wouldn't be here, or other things in the universe would not be here. They could not exist if the fundamental constants and principles of physics and nature were not just where they are. So, Dr. Craig, if you could go ahead and go into the fine-tuning argument.
Yes, that's a very nice analogy, David, from the fish tank. What scientists have been stunned to discover in the last 50 years is that the initial conditions of the universe, given in the Big Bang itself, were fine-tuned for the existence of intelligent life in this cosmos with a delicacy and complexity that is literally incomprehensible and incalculable. It appears that from its very inception, the universe has been fine-tuned for the existence of intelligent life. And these fundamental constants and quantities are such that if they were altered by less than a hair's breadth, the balance would be upset and intelligent life would not exist anywhere in the entire universe. These are universal conditions for life on any planet, anywhere in the entire cosmos, because these are conditions given in the Big Bang. Now, there are only three explanations available for this remarkable fine-tuning: either physical necessity, chance, or design. And what the argument says is that the best explanation of these three is design. That when you look at physical necessity and you look at chance, both of those explanations are explanatorily deficient in various ways, and therefore it follows logically that the best explanation of the fine-tuning of the universe is intelligent design. And therefore there exists a designer of the entire cosmos who transcends the universe and the laws of nature and has designed the universe to be life-permitting.
Now, could you give us a couple of examples, if people aren't familiar with this argument? What sort of things are you referring to when you say that if things were changed, even a hair's breadth, we would not be here?
Well, take the four fundamental forces of nature that are known to contemporary physics: gravitation, electromagnetism, the atomic weak force, and the atomic strong force. These four forces govern all of physics, and yet these forces have to be fine-tuned or intelligent life could not exist. For example, the weak force, which operates within the atomic nucleus, has to be finely tuned to 1 part out of 10 to the 100th power. And if you were to alter it, either stronger or weaker, by just that tiny amount, this life-permitting balance would be destroyed and intelligent life could not exist anywhere in the cosmos. Another example would be the ratio between the mass of the proton and the mass of the neutron. This ratio between the masses of these two subatomic particles has to be incredibly fine-tuned, because if it were different, the balance that permits life to exist would be destroyed and there would be no life anywhere in the universe. Indeed, this fine-tuning is such that if you were to upset the balance, there wouldn't even be chemistry. There wouldn't even be matter, much less planets where life might evolve. So the consequences of upsetting this balance are just truly disastrous.
So for viewers, for many of our viewers, this will be relatively new information. So let me go ahead and explain where we're going with this. Think about a situation where you could only be alive. You'd only be alive if some astronomically improbable things occurred first. So suppose some psychopath comes up to you and says, I'm sending you in a 7-Eleven. You're going to buy 1 lottery ticket. If you win, I'll let you live. If you don't win, you're dead. You'd probably think, all right, I'm dead. This just isn't going to happen. So suppose you go in there, you buy your lottery ticket, and you win. So you don't get killed. If it had been anything else, if any other set of numbers had come up, you'd be dead. You'd be pretty surprised there, but you probably think, wow, I'm really, really lucky. I'm really, really lucky this time. What luck. But suppose he tells you to do again. All right, go do it again, buy another lottery ticket, and if you win again, then I'll let you live, but if you don't, I'm going to kill you. Now suppose you go in again, and you think, wow, what are the odds that this is going to happen again? And you buy another lottery ticket, and you win. Now suppose this keeps happening. Suppose he keeps sending you in to buy a lottery ticket, and if you win, he lets you live. If you don't, he's going to kill you, but you keep winning. Wouldn't there come a point, eventually, where you have to say, this lottery's fixed. This can't keep happening by chance. I can't keep winning the lottery over and over and over again just by luck. Someone has to be behind this. God or some person is setting up the numbers so that I constantly win. But you would conclude that someone's behind this. And this is similar to what we're saying here. Namely, we've already won the lottery a ton of times. For us to be here right now, we've won the lottery over and over and over and over and over, because the values and the constants of physics could have had a wide range of values, and yet they always turn up to have the values that are necessary for us to be here. And what I think this shows is that someone's rigged the universe. It looks like someone has planned out the universe, that someone, whoever made the universe, had us in mind. And that's the only way we can be here, because some being had us in mind. And so if we're talking about how can we know not just that the universe was caused, but how can we know the attributes of that cause? We've already seen several of them, timeless and so on. But I think what we could gather from this argument is that the cause of the universe is intelligent, and that the cause of the universe is motivated by a concern for us. We are of importance to the creator of this universe. Would you agree with that, Dr. Craig?
Yes, I think that's right. And it cannot be exaggerated, the kind of intelligence that would be required to fine-tune all of the constants and quantities of nature to this incomprehensible precision in order for the universe to be life-permitting. So we're talking about a very, very powerful, if not omniscient, designer of the cosmos.
Mm-hmm. Now, it seems we're missing one very, very important attribute of God. I think you could say that, based on the fine-tuning argument, if the designer of the universe is motivated by some sort of concern for us, or we are of importance, you could start getting to the attribute of goodness. But it wouldn't be enough to say in other words, what we think of in our concept of God, a being who is the ultimate standard of goodness, or completely good. So that would be the purpose of the next argument, to sort of fill in that gap, wouldn't it?
That's right. I think that what David has expressed clearly here is that these arguments complement one another by building a kind of cumulative case for theism. And some of the arguments will give you certain properties of God, and other arguments will give you different properties. None of the arguments so far gives us the moral properties of this being, and that's why it's important to look at the so-called moral argument for the existence of God, which is, again, one of the classic arguments for God's existence. And there are many versions of this, but one goes basically like this. It says that if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. That is to say, if atheism is true, then socio-cultural relativism is true. Moral values are just the byproducts of biological and social evolution, and they vary from culture to culture and even person to person. But there aren't any objective moral values or duties that we have if God does not exist. But the second premise would be that there are objective moral values and duties. In moral experience, we apprehend a realm of objective moral values, and we sense moral duties that are laid upon us. We recognize, for example, that it's better to love another person than to hate him, that torturing children for fun is wrong, that child abuse is morally wrong. But if that's true, if you agree that there are objective moral values and duties, then it follows logically and necessarily that therefore God exists.
Well, thank you, Doctor. You know, we happen to have a caller on the line. His name is David, actually, and we're going to go ahead and go to that call right now. David, can you hear us?
Hello, Dr. David Wood and Dr. Craig. How are you guys doing?
Hey, is this the Fat Man?
It's the Fat Man.
Hey, how's it going, bro?
It's good. I had a great time this weekend. I'm going through withdrawals. But I have a question for Dr. Craig. I wonder, have you ever read any of Dr. Hugh Ross's books? Would you recommend that?
Yes. Yeah, in fact, Hugh and I have participated in outreach events together, not only in this country, but also in the former Soviet Union.
Really? Okay. Well, that's a good endorsement then. I'll invest the money then. Thank you very much, guys, and you guys have a good day.
All right, thanks, David.
Thanks, David.
Bye.
Now, Dr. Craig, going back to this, to the moral argument, if I were an atheist, I wouldn't. I don't think I would see the plausibility of this argument instantly. And yet, when you really stick with the when you examine the alternatives to these premises, in other words, if you want to say that these first two premises are false, you really got some problems here. If you want to say there are no, so if you want to reject the second premise, that there are moral values, there are objective moral values. If anyone missed it, objective moral values, these are things that are true, they're right or wrong, and it doesn't matter what you think of them. In other words, if every person on the planet decided tomorrow that it's okay to torture old ladies for fun, it would still be wrong, even if we all think otherwise. So it's the claim to say that there are objective moral values is just to say that there are things that are really right or wrong, and it doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter if you change your mind and you say, no, it's okay for me to go rape a child or something like that. It wouldn't matter if you say that or if you believe it. It would still be wrong no matter what. So the only way an atheist could really object to the claim that there are objective moral values would be to say there are no objective moral values, and that just, it seems to me that would be absurd to an extreme. And I mean, you would actually have to say it would be okay for me if an atheist says this. I could just walk up to the atheist and bash the atheist's head in, and he wouldn't be able to say anything about it. He could not say that it's wrong. Or if I were to torture a baby in front of this atheist, he could not say it's wrong. All he could say is, well, I have a different taste preference from you, and so I don't like that, but I can't actually say that it's wrong. So it would seem to almost make you not human in order to reject the idea that there are objective moral values. So, and I don't see how an atheist can reasonably or plausibly reject that. But as far as premise one is concerned, if God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. If an atheist wants to reject that, it seems he would have to say, no, there is some source of objective morality apart from God. God does not have to be the ultimate source of objective moral values. There can be some other source of absolute right and wrong that transcends humanity. And I just have no clue how there could be anything that transcends humanity and governs all right and wrong that would not be God. In other words, it's God or it's just us. If it's just us, it's not objective. And yet it has to be objective, therefore it has to be more than us, therefore it has to be God. So I don't think many atheists really understand the force of this simple argument.
Well, I think probably you're right. Richard Dawkins is such a great illustration. If you read his book, The God Delusion, you find he actually agrees with both of these premises, but doesn't see the conclusion that follows from them. On the one hand, he says that on atheism, there is no good, there is no evil, there's nothing but pitiless indifference. On the other hand, his book is full of moral judgments. He condemns religious intolerance and homophobia. He condemns the Amish for their education of their children. He condemns Catholic parents raising their children to believe in Roman Catholicism. He even gives his own revised 10 Commandments in the book for how moral conduct ought to be carried out. So on the one hand, he denies that there's any objective moral values. On the other hand, he is committed to them over and over and over again, and he just doesn't see the contradiction then of being an atheist.
So would you say that an atheist just cannot hold this consistently? They'd want to maintain that there are no objective moral values in order to avoid the conclusion of this argument, but that would result in an unlivable philosophy.
It is unlivable. That's very true. I mean, there's been no atheist that has been able to live life as though there is no objective moral value. You would have to treat other persons as worthless, as absolutely valueless, and you would have to regard yourself as valueless, and that other persons can treat you as worthless in whatever way they want. And it's simply impossible to live that way. I think we have an intrinsic apprehension of the moral value of other persons and of our own self-worth.
Well, Doctor, we're in the home stretch of our program here, roughly about 7 minutes left. We have one caller. We'd like to get him on. His name is Joel. And Joel, would you make a comment or a question? And we'd like to get a response quickly here. Thank you for calling.
Yes, hello, this is Joe, and I have a question for your eminent guest there.
Okay.
Yes, I was wondering, I've been following the creation-evolution debate, and I was wondering what our guests, how they feel. How important is this? How strategic is this? I know it's a parallel issue to the idea of God existing or not, but as far as in the public square, the best place to fight this for us as Christians, would this be a good outlet for that? I mean, the philosophical debates that have been mentioned, and I wonder if it's not more captivating to the average person to talk about origins or creation and evolution. I just would like to hear some comments on that as far as trying to get average American people to consider not just the existence of God, which most people concede, but the ramifications thereof, and ultimately, of course, on their own souls.
Thank you, Joe. We have a few minutes. Doctor, could you comment, please?
This is a very interesting question, and I would want to make a distinction here between the philosophical importance of this issue and its social importance. Philosophically, I don't think this is a very important issue. I do not think that evolution disproves the existence of God. I think you've already got God from the fine-tuning of the universe, and therefore if he wanted to use evolution as a means for creating human beings on this planet, that's perfectly within his prerogative. So philosophically, I just don't think this is important at all. However, as the caller rightly saw, it is socially very important, because this is an issue that people are vitally concerned about. They're more interested in it than they are, say, in cosmology. And many people are under the impression that if the Darwinian theory of evolution is true, that therefore theism is somehow disproved. And so I do think it's pretty vital that Christian scientists and philosophers address this issue and show that the theory of evolution simply doesn't have the sort of anti-theistic implications that people like Dawkins and others claim that it does. And moreover, I think it's worthwhile calling into question some of the hypotheses in the theory that are not well established scientifically, that even their proponents admit are still open questions.
Well, Doctor, we thank you. Why don't you give us the opportunity? We mentioned your book earlier, which is called On Guard, and is that available now?
Oh yes, it's available, and the best place to get it would be at our website, which is reasonablefaith.org. At reasonablefaith.org, we have an online bookstore, and that is where you can buy these materials at the most steeply discounted prices. You just click on the button that says store, and it will take you to our online store, and you can get it there. There's also a study guide that accompanies the book that's available at a discount price.
You know, I was on the website earlier today, and for those that are watching, make sure you make note of that, reasonablefaith.org. Did I say that correctly, Doctor?
Yes.
Okay, great. Reasonablefaith.org. Please visit that website, check out the resources. I actually listened to a podcast earlier today.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a great website. I wish I had more time. I plan to go back to it, really. And just meeting you tonight via Skype and listening to you speak and then hearing this discussion, you've added to my bailiwick of resources out there. So we're glad to meet you this way electronically, and we are grateful for ABN Ministries for this opportunity to provide this show tonight, exposing atheism. Again, not sharing atheism, not participating in atheism, not believing in atheism, but exposing it. And we're grateful for this opportunity. I know we don't have much time left here on our program. We do appreciate your support out there as viewers. Continue to check out our website at www.abnsat.com. Call us with your comments, your prayer requests, your support at 248-416-1300. Consider the things that were mentioned tonight, the 4 arguments for God's existence. God indeed does exist. We pray that you indeed would believe that. We are close to the program here. Doctor, was there any final comments you'd like to make at all tonight?
Well, I just want to say thank you to David Wood for all that he's doing for the cause of the kingdom. I know what you've been doing up there recently in Michigan and the arrests that were made.
Yes.
And keep up the good work, David. You're a bold witness for Christ, and we're proud of you.
And I'd like to thank Dr. Craig. I think many people underestimate the importance of your work. I want to say, as a former atheist, it was shocking. It was shocking for me to one day meet an intelligent atheist who could give a coherent defense of his belief, and that right there made me more interested in Christianity than anything else. And I know that many other atheists out there, they grow up, they think that Christianity is ridiculous. They think that if you put any Christian on stage with an atheist, the Christian will be shown and exposed as a fool. And the impact of having people like Dr. Craig step on stage with scholars from Oxford and Cambridge and all over the world, and to reduce their arguments to shambles, that impact cannot be overestimated. And so I thank you, Dr. Craig.
Well, Doctor, we have 60 seconds and counting here. I'm going to finish up by thanking the audience again. I want to briefly pray, and then we'll sign off for the evening. Are you going to stay with us for at least that part of it?
All right.
Great. Dear Lord, we are grateful for this opportunity to be here tonight, for these men that have been dedicated to serving you. Certainly not perfect, Lord. We are serving a perfect God, though, and we're grateful that you indeed exist and that you indeed have made impact in our lives and millions of other people that are in this world today and that are watching tonight. We're grateful for this, for your word and for your spirit, and may we just continue to strive to seek you and serve you and honor you in all that we say and do. And God, we pray for the ministry that David is involved with, and for Dr. William Lane Craig. We're grateful for this website that we have, or this ministry here at abnsat.com, and we're grateful for your love, and we just want to continue to serve you in all that we say and do. In Jesus' name, amen. Lord, we're grateful for your attendance tonight. Continue to call us, and stay tuned another half hour. We'll be doing another live program. That's Jesus or Muhammad with Pastor Joseph, David as well, and also our friend Sam Shamoon. Until then, God bless you and have a wonderful evening.